Hello everyone, and welcome to another video. Today we are going to continue talking about the Jefferson presidency, but we're also going to talk about one of the biggest land deals in history. So, we're going to talk about how how America almost doubled its land ownership in one step. To get more land, Jefferson wanted the United States to expand to the Pacific, despite the fact that much of the continent was already inhabited by American Indians or claimed by other nations. At first, Jefferson believed that Spain's vast Louisiana territory west of the Mississippi River would be easy to conquer. He noted that the Spanish colonists were few, their empire was weak, and they were distracted by the war in Europe. Jefferson's plans went awry, however, when the United States got a new and far more dangerous neighbor to the west. In 1801, France's military dictator Napoleon Bonaparte had forced Spain to give him the Louisiana Territory, including the strategic city of New Orleans. The French threatened to block American access to the market in New Orleans. An alarmed Jefferson considered joining the British in an alliance to fight France. And now isn't that a quick turnaround? Just not too long ago at all in our history here, we had allied with France to fight Britain. Now we're considering allying with the British to fight France. Jefferson reasoned that he could avoid war by offering to buy New Orleans from the French. When James Monroe and Robert Livingston, the American minister in France, approached Napoleon, they found him surprisingly receptive. Napoleon's imperial plans had been foiled by slave rebels in the Caribbean colony of Saint-Domingue, which is now Haiti. Led by Toussaint Louverture, the rebels defeated a French army sent to suppress them. Without that army to occupy Louisiana and needing money to fight the British, Napoleon decided to sell all of the Louisiana Territory. In the Louisiana Purchase of 1803, Jefferson obtained a vast territory extending from the Mississippi River to the Rocky Mountains. Now, I've included a picture here where you can see, it's kind of a small picture, but you can see just how big, how massive the Louisiana Purchase was. So this green area in the center of the map is the Louisiana Purchase. The United States was only from everything to the right of the Louisiana Purchase. That's all the United States was at this point. And we didn't have Spain yet. We didn't have Florida yet. So, ignore Florida. This is all that the United States was. So by purchasing the Louisiana Territory, we almost doubled our landmass. At about 828,000 square miles, the Louisiana Territory nearly doubled the size of the United States. For all of this, the United States paid only $15 million. $15 million for all of that land. That's cheap. Although a great bargain, the Louisiana Purchase was also something of an embarrassment, as it contradicted Jefferson's constitutional principles. He had long argued for a minimal federal government, and the Constitution did not authorize the federal government to buy territory from a foreign country. Jefferson confessed that he had done an act beyond the Constitution. So, Jefferson, by his own admission, said that whenever he did this, it was wrong, that he did not have the authority to do it, but for only $15 million, and you get all of that land, and you don't have to fight France, I think he was willing to bend the rules a little bit, so to speak, to get all of that land for, I know $15 million is a lot of money to you, and it's a lot of money to me, but in order to buy all of that land, that is a steal and a half. So, but Jefferson confessed that he had done an act beyond the Constitution. He had kind of violated his own principles, but I think by doubling the size of the country, I think he's okay. In 1804, Jefferson sent Meriwether Lewis and William Clark to explore the new territory in what became known as the Lewis and Clark Expedition. The men were guided much of the way by a Shoshone woman named Sacagawea and her husband. So, I'm sure everybody's heard of Lewis and Clark. They were the ones that explored the Louisiana Purchase. and they explored all the way to the Pacific Ocean. Okay, so here is a graphic that kind of gives more information about the Louisiana Purchase. This is the cost. It was $11,250,000 to pay for land, and there was also a cost. It was American merchant claims against France, and they got 828,000 square miles for it. So approving the purchase in the Senate, there were 24 votes yes and 7 votes no. And in the House of Representatives, there were 90 votes yes and 25 votes no. So as you can see, it was vastly supported in Congress. So this is, while yes, the president did act outside of the Constitution in order to purchase this, I think everybody was okay with it. They were willing to look the other way for such a good deal. Okay, here's a map that kind of it's a better map to show you exactly what the Louisiana Purchase gave us. So, like I was saying, we were all that the United States was this green area. These were, well, this is like the established states, and this light green area, the Indiana Territory and Mississippi Territory, it belonged to the United States, but it wasn't really settled. We technically owned it, but there weren't like towns and settlements and people living there yet. So while we owned it, it really wasn't set up to be settled just yet. And like I was saying earlier, at this time, Florida as we know it today, and some of the other southern states were still owned by Spain. So but as we all know, eventually we do get Florida, and we will cover that in a future section. Foreign difficulties challenge Jefferson. While Jefferson succeeded in his plans to expand to the west, he faced a number of significant challenges to solidifying the stability and economy of the United States. Conflict in North Africa. The Barbary states of North Africa, Morocco, Algiers, Tunis, and Tripoli, were profiting by seizing American ships and sailors in the Mediterranean Sea. To buy immunity from that piracy, the Washington and Adams administrations had paid protection money to the Barbary states. Jefferson was willing to do the same until the ruler of Tripoli increased his price. In 1801, Jefferson sent the small American navy to blockade the port of Tripoli, winning a favorable peace in 1805, concluding the Barbary War. So the countries of North Africa that are bordering on the Mediterranean Sea had sent these pirates out, and they were essentially stealing from all the American ships in the Mediterranean Sea. So Jefferson sends the small American navy, there wasn't much of a navy at this point, to blockade Tripoli, and by doing so, they had worked out a peaceful arrangement with those states. As the population grew and spread westward, the United States needed to expand overseas markets for the surplus produce raised on its new farms. From 1793 to 1807, war in Europe aided this goal. The dominant British Navy quickly captured most of France's merchant ships. To supply food to the French colonies in the West Indies and to export their sugar, the French turned to American ships. Because the British had banned direct American voyages between the French West Indies and France, American merchants picked up cargoes in the French colonies and took them to ports in the United States, where they unloaded them. Then, the merchants reshipped the cargoes to France as if they were American products. So this is a way to kind of get around the British rules that had been set up. The re-export trade fuels conflict with Britain. And we are going to see in coming sections conflict with Britain again. The value of this re-export trade soared from about $300,000 in 1790 to nearly $59 million in 1807, creating a boom for the American economy. To meet the new demand, American shipyards produced hundreds of new ships, tripling the size of the nation's merchant marine by 1807. Prosperous American merchants built new wharves, warehouses, and mansions, boosting the construction trades in seaport cities. Farmers also benefited by selling their produce to feed French soldiers in Europe and enslaved Africans and plantation owners in the West Indies. The British hated the re-export trade for two reasons. First, it helped the French economy, which sustained Napoleon's army. Second, the new trade helped the United States become Britain's greatest commercial competitor. In 1805, as British merchants lost markets and profits to American shippers, British warships began to stop and confiscate growing numbers of American merchant ships for trading with the French. So we are seeing a new issue arise here. For so long the British had looked down on the Americans. They thought that they were going to eventually, their government was going to fail, they were just going to come crawling back to them. Well, soon they became their greatest competitor. These people that they thought were just these bumbling fools across an ocean are now their number one trade competitor. And worse than that, they're supporting the French, which are the British's enemy. So this is turning out terribly for the British. The British Navy also angered the United States by relying on impressment, or taking American sailors from their ships and forcing them to serve in the British Navy. Engaged in a tough war, the British desperately needed sailors for their huge fleet. Britain insisted that anyone born within its empire was a British subject for life. Yet British naval officers also took American-born sailors. By 1812, about 6,000 American citizens had been impressed for the harsh duty of serving on a British warship. Britain impresses American sailors. This impressment was essentially kidnapping. Whenever a British warship would catch an American merchant ship, they would board, they would take all of their stuff, they would kidnap all of the sailors, and then force them, even if they weren't necessarily a soldier, they would force them to serve in the British Navy. And, you're in the middle of the ocean. If you say no, well, they're probably going to do one of two things. They're either going to shoot you, or they're going to throw you into the ocean. They're going to tie your hands behind your back and throw you into the ocean. So what are you going to do? You're going to serve on that ship, because that's the only way you're getting out of that situation alive. So, but they did this. The information says here, 6,000 American citizens had been impressed, kidnapped, for the harsh duty of serving on a British warship. That is terrible. At first, Federalist merchants were willing to regard the British abuses as unfortunate costs of doing business on the high seas. They pointed out that the old trade with Great Britain remained even more valuable than the new re-export trade with France. But Democratic Republicans insisted that the British actions insulted the United States and threatened the country's economic growth. In 1807, when the British attacked an American warship, the Chesapeake, in order to take some of its sailors, many Americans, including many Federalists, were outraged. So, originally, they weren't even going to do anything about it. They were just like, oh, well, that's just an unfortunate cost of doing business on the high seas. I feel like the people that said that probably didn't have brothers, husbands, fathers, sons that were kidnapped and forced into essentially military slavery to the British. So, but whenever the British attacked an American warship, that is whenever they said, okay, enough is enough, and people are outraged. Impressment was a kind of forced recruitment. Men were often seized and forced to join the American Navy. As you can see here, they were tying people up and forcing them onto these British ships. The United States lacked a navy large enough to challenge the British fleet. Jefferson balked at the high cost of building a bigger navy, which would undermine his policies of reducing the national debt and keeping taxes low. He also worried that a large military would become a threat to the Republic. As an alternative to war in 1807, Jefferson persuaded Congress to declare an embargo, suspending trade with the British by ordering American ships to stay in port. He expected the embargo to starve the British and close their factories, creating riots in the streets. So he's going to try an embargo here. He's going to try to stop doing any business with them. Try to affect their businesses, and if they can't make any money, they're going to have to shut down, and then they're not going to have enough food and products for their own people, and then that's going to create riots in Britain. And Jefferson was trying to find a peaceful way, a way to do this without engaging in war. Instead, the British found other markets in South America. Meanwhile, the embargo bankrupted American merchants, threw American sailors out of work, and hurt farmers who could no longer export their crops. Exploiting voter anger, the Federalists gained support in the northern states, especially in New England. Even Jefferson had to admit failure lifting the embargo just before he retired from the presidency in 1809. Despite having been easily re-elected in 1804, the embargo had caused his popularity to lag. He was succeeded by his friend James Madison, who defeated a Federalist rival in the election of 1808. Okay everyone, that's going to be the end of this video. If you have any questions, you know how to get a hold of me. I hope everybody's having a great day, and I'll see you again real soon.